I will switch to English now because the main presentation is in English. Therefore, I will do my short introduction in English as well. But before I hand over to Koen and Dave, our guest, I would like to briefly talk about what it is that we are discussing today, marketing dashboard. On the left side of this slide, you see an example of a typical dashboard. It's taken out of the issue of our journal that Sandra has mentioned before. You see that it contains a lot of data. Typically, this data is visualized. We have graphs. We have bar charts. On this side, we have a regional map of the world showing regional performance. And in the middle, we have an almost iconic form of presentations of KPIs in dashboards, which is kind of speedometer style. This data can be quite granular, like click data, or it can be broader in scope, like profit and loss, for instance. And it could also range over different periods of time like daily, monthly, yearly, quarterly, whatever. These dashboards fulfill several functions. They should be business intelligence tools and carry a hopefully very meaningful collection of data, of metrics and KPIs. Dashboards should also serve as communication tools and show what is important to an organization. And those dashboards should help align all parties of the organization to the right objectives. And third, dashboards should also be decision support tools and help managers make better decisions, plan better marketing action, and make the right spending priorities. It's, however, not so easy to fulfill all these tasks. Sometimes, according, for instance, to Neil Hoyne, who we interviewed, he's from Google, dashboards are rather decision art than decision support. They can be nice to look at, but of little use. So you really need to answer some key questions to create dashboards that are really useful. How can dashboards be designed to actually improve marketing decision making? Which KPIs are most useful in dashboards? Are there some classic KPIs which are helpful to any organization? And are there some newer metrics as well that shouldn't be overlooked, which have evolved over time because the business environment changes, because societal challenges change? And also, how can dashboards remain relevant over time and in changing context? Does it make sense to use the same the same metrics quarter after quarter and compare them? Or do we look at dashboards, have to look at dashboards differently with all these disruptions happening in our environment at the moment? I'm very happy that we have two guests who can answer these questions and will help you make more relevant dashboards. Koen Pauwels, welcome Koen and Dave. Koen and Dave are two of the most renowned researchers on marketing measurement. And they will help you or give you advice on how to make your dashboards more relevant. Koen is professor at the Northeastern University, and he was before at TAC School of Business at Dartmouth and helped build a university in Istanbul. Dave is at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, but he has also taught at Harvard, at Stanford, and at the INSEAD in France. And both have an impressive record of academic publications. They have consulted companies all over the world, from Amazon to Unilever. They serve on boards as directors of several academic, cultural, and business organizations. And they are both also very successful book authors. They've written particularly on the link between marketing and finance and how to translate marketing action into financial results. So we are really very happy to have you here today, and please take over now. We are looking forward to your thoughts on that topic.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra and Christine. And it's such a pleasure to write a special issue again for NIM. So for me, this really fits in the one I did in 2015 on truly accountable marketing. And then here, this is really a specialization on the marketing dashboards, everything that Dave and I have learned over the years in helping companies with it, also thinking about it and publishing academically. I mean, in terms of kind of the next generation, I always say I just arrived with the Deutsche Bahn here in Odense in Denmark, and we were 15 minutes delayed. So that's kind of the past of marketing dashboards. They didn't tell us what was going on. We had no kind of transparency or good predictive power. Whereas when you are managing a business, you really want to have the right metrics at the right time at your fingertips to take corrective action, to see where your time and scarce resources should be spent. So it has been an absolute pleasure to work with Dave on this. We had in the special issue some wonderful experts that we asked to write specific pieces of their specialization. And as Christine already mentioned, we interviewed Neil Horn, which is the Chief Strategy Officer at Google, to talk about what he has seen in practice and some of the things that come there. So we wanted to start with answering your first question, Christine, which is really in this issue, how do you design a dashboard to improve decision making? And so we have these 6 steps that are also very clearly aligned in the editorial. And this is where we feel that most of the opportunity lies, but also most of the challenges. Dave, you want to get us started in selecting the right dashboards metrics and populating them with data?
So even before we jump into that, I also want to thank Sandra and Christine, and thank you very much for including us here. And it's been a pleasure for me to work with you, Koen, in developing this. Very much have appreciated it. And one of the things that Christine said in our introduction is that we have worked globally with companies all around the world. Koen is currently now just arrived in Germany. I left him a couple of days ago in Croatia, and I'm in Singapore, and so broadcasting to you from Singapore. Yeah. And by the way, since we have to do things just on time, at a certain point I have to leave because I've got a meeting, so I'm going to apologize right now. But I actually want to start by capitalizing on 2 things that Christine said in her introductory comments. And it's sort of to give us a framing of how we think about a dashboard. Mm-hmm. And what Christine said in two different ways is that a dashboard is instrumental to support decision making. And I think many people use a dashboard to sort of provide rewards and promotion. Look how well you've done. And it's been backwards looking. And part of what it is that we're going to end up talking about is thinking about how we can use it actually as a decision-making tool. And so we talk about that in our article. It's talked about throughout the whole issue, and it certainly is a highlight of what Neil Horn at Google talks about as well. Koen, are you moving the slides forward? Could we move to the next slide?
I am moving the slide, yeah. Okay. Here we go.
I can't see the next slide.
I can't see the next slide either. Which slide are you now, Koen?
I have put it to how to design a dashboard, so nobody sees that one.
No. Yeah, I go to okay. No. How about the others? Would you just write
audience?
The main people here.
Do you see how to design a dashboard?
No, one more slide. 2 more slides. There we go.
Slide 9 of 19 you are now.
So we've got it now where it says how to design a dashboard.
Yeah. So there's a bit of a delay apparently. Yeah.
Okay.
And the first question that's up there is selecting the right dashboard metrics. Yep. And that is such a critical issue, is making sure we have the right metrics that are on our dashboard. And too often what it is that we see is people look at what it is they've naturally collected, but it's not necessarily what's going to help them in decisions. One of the things that we'll talk about is not over-cluttering your dashboard with measures of all sorts of things that aren't useful in your decision-making. So one of the things that I would start off with saying is, we need to think about, if I got a different answer on the dashboard on this particular metric, would I end up doing anything differently? Would I spend any differently? Would I make any other different decisions? So I think that's part of where it is that we end up wanting to talk about. And we're going to jump into looking at sort of what are sort of the classic measures. And then we're also going to start talking about what are some of those additional measures that we want to look at. We are then, go ahead.
Yeah, and so maybe as an example, right? So I started consulting for a car manufacturer in the US, and they were part of a Japanese brand, which I can't name. And so when I relocated to Istanbul in 2009, they were just down the street, and they were very proud of being the largest Facebook car in Turkey. And Turkey by that time was the third Facebook nation in the world in terms of accounts, and there was so much activity. And they said, we followed the advice of all these brand consultants that say, look, you have to spend resources where your consumers are. A lot of our consumers are online, and we have spent all of this money to build the best site. We have wonderful engagement metrics and everything, but our sales don't increase. We're stuck at like 2% market share. So I asked them, I said, well, what is really the key metric, right? So what needs to happen for people to buy your cars? And they said, oh, that's easy, a test drive. We need to get them in our new cars. And so we looked at past data, and we showed that there was no correlation between Facebook engagement for their brand and test drives. So that just indicated that something was wrong with that metric. In my academic works, the two most important criteria, if any consultant kind of tells you, hey, you should really measure this metric and put it on your dashboard, is it responsive to your decisions, right? That's marketing responsiveness. And does it convert into something that you ultimately care about, right? Which could be sales or profits or donations. But so if you have the sales conversion so that the metric actually matters to your ultimate objective, and you have responsiveness that if you change your decision, the metric changes, then you have a potential for a good metric.
Absolutely. And then once you've selected those metrics, then obviously you have to have the data for it. It should not be, look, we have the data, therefore it should be on our dashboard. It should be, what is it we need to be measuring? And then, of course, you have to say, do we have the data to help us with that? And that's really critical, that we start with the metric we want, and then we make sure that we have the data that could help support it. And obviously, you don't want metrics on your dashboard that you can't collect the data for. But the one that we have highlighted on this particular slide is establishing the relationship between the metrics. And so you saw previously, Christine showed a typical dashboard, and you saw all the speedometers that were in the center of the dashboard that she had. And you'd like to know how these are related to each other. And it's critical that you can be able to do that. And the analogy of thinking about a dashboard is like the dashboard on your automobile. And you know that when you push down on the accelerator, the speedometer is going to go up, and you're going to see the tachometer go up, and you're going to see the fuel gauge go down and the odometer moving faster. And so you see these interconnections. And the same should be true for a marketing dashboard, is you need to know the relationships between them. Really, really critical for us.
Yeah, and maybe to add to this one, right? So in my consultancy, I'm very often asked, should we track certain metrics, or are they vanity metrics, right? And so then I'm like, well, connect them to your ultimate objectives. I'm an econometrician, so I typically like to look at past data, but I've now incorporated kind of experiments and field experiments to test that for you. And so very often you see that the relationship is just not there. And if it's there, you can actually quantify. So when, for instance, YouTube says, oh, sorry, we made a measurement mistakes, and instead of, that 100,000 people watched your video for 5 minutes, it's only 80,000 people who watched it for 2 minutes. Or if an influencer says, oh, sorry, I have a lot of fake followers. so this is all, the measurement part is wrong. the companies that I work with, they never have a problem with that because they have established that if we pay this influencer X amount of money, in the past, we get about this much more additional sales controlling for everything else. So if the influencer suddenly says, oh, no, I don't have 1 million followers, I don't have 500,000, I mean, the relationship still holds. So it kind of, it frees you up of too much nightmares of, people changing their measurement system because you have made the steps from your inputs, let's say marketing actions, through the throughput metric, through your output metric, and that just works as a skeleton to bring in almost every new digital marketing product or new thing that you can spend your money on.
And then when we think about designing that dashboard, as we were just talking about, and we're going to get into it in subsequent slides, but when you design that dashboard, you really have to think about what are those decisions that I'm going to make? What information do I need for that? But we also note in this comment, it's not just a scorecard. And this is what I was referring to earlier, what it is that's happened in the past. It really has to have some look towards what's going to happen in the future, so that as we know the interconnections between these, we know that if we change our spending on a particular mention and we're able to get an increase in number of views or number of customers that we have, what the implications are going to be for that for us. And if we have that interconnection, we then can do forecasting if we take particular actions, as well as if our competition takes some actions. So our competitors need to be on that dashboard as well, and absolutely part of what it is that we have. And with that, by the way, we ought to be able to do what-if analysis in the same sense of how it is that we would do that in a spreadsheet.
And I'm happy to give an example again, if I may. So it's the same car manufacturer. What happened in the US when we were kind of updating the model, right? So I always get the question, how soon should we update the model? And so I typically say, well, unless something really structurally happens, probably things in prediction are going to be about the same. In terms of, hey, if in pharmaceutical, for instance, people take about 2 months after seeing an advertisement before they can go to their doctor and ask for it, and you see the sales coming up after 2 months, that's probably going to stay the same unless that happens. Of course, the pandemic was an obvious kind of break that we wanted to completely re-estimate the model. In terms of this car manufacturer, they had been running their model and updating it, every quarter with new numbers and get slightly different kind of effect sizes, but the structure was great. And then Toyota got into problems with their recalls. So this is a few years ago, obviously. And so their competitor got in trouble and they suddenly got an increase in sales. So our forecasts were off. We were under forecasting production. And so, well, the first of thing that I said is, well, we have to kind of, increase our forecast, right? Let's just do it with a step dummy about kind of, this is how much we now see we sell more. But then right away, we started the process of seeing how effective their advertising was now. Because we said, well, a competitor is in problem, right? And that's also from, Japanese manufacturers. You either get more sales and your advertising is more effective because, people want a Japanese brand and they don't go for Toyota. They may be much more open to your advertising. Or it could be bad for you because people think that there may be problems with all Japanese manufacturers, right? And so we had all of these interesting questions that we wanted to analyze with new data, and then we updated the model, and we could do much better what-if analysis to see, hey, if I now ramp up my advertising, do I get a lot more effectiveness or not in this time?
And obviously, while I've been talking about the need for the interconnection between all the marketing measures that we have on our dashboard, it's also essential that we connect it with what's going on financially. And so for us to have credibility within the rest of the organization, we have to know how marketing has an impact. And by the way, it's not always a positive impact on the financials. We increase our particular spending, and generally that comes up as a cost long before we end up seeing the particular consequences. If you're investing in your brand, oh my gosh, there's a cost that happens with that. That ends up having a negative impact, obviously, on your income statement. and the brand has a longer term impact. And so we need to have sort of the time sequence in there, but most importantly, we need to know how it's connected to our turnover, our market share, but also the overall, return on that particular investment. And more, that's sort of the pressure that marketing is feeling from the rest of the organization.
Okay, ready to move on to the next slide, Dave? How about some classic metrics that that we think is probably a good idea to have on most dashboards? You want to take the first or the second one?
Either way, I'm waiting for the slide to show up on the screen. so that'll be helpful. But very quickly, what it is I can say is there's a whole bunch of classic measures that we frequently have, and it would be things like that track sort of the marketing funnel that we're very, very used to, and that would be things from awareness all the way down to sales. But we could think about awareness and consideration, intent, loyalty, word of mouth. We don't always have great measures of, but that would be a classic measure. And it's become much more common in e-commerce than what it is that we used to see, because now we get to see some of the viralness that's out there. But certainly classic measures would be those like market share, customer satisfaction, and very much so Net Promoter Score has been a very popular thing.
And so maybe one addition to me, going back to Dave's point, that you should really measure what matters, even if you can't get perfect data on it. So word of mouth, I have several papers that show that offline word of mouth may be very different from online word of mouth, specifically if it's a politically sensitive issue. So we continue to have certain brand events, at least in the US and also in Germany, I've heard, that you basically have online people complaining about a stance that the brand took, and a lot more kind of buzz and people being upset. Whereas the offline word of mouth is going positive, because your core customers, when they're talking one-on-one, when they're not broadcasting, they're actually really happy with your products. And so that kind of events show that there's even sometimes a negative correlation between offline and online word of mouth. In most normal situations, though, online word of mouth is so much easier to measure and to get than offline word of mouth. And so it acts as a good proxy. So, if I'm selling toothpaste, probably Twitter is not going to be representative of my customers. But if sentiment going up and down and buzz about my brand going up and down, Twitter correlates highly with how it does in the real world, then I'm fine with that one. And so one thing that I learned working with companies is that it's better to kind of, identify which measures you would really ideally want and get at least some imperfect measure of it, instead of kind of saying, oh, this platform is offering all these free metrics and they're very precisely measured, so we're going to use those. You have to work backwards, as Dave said, from your decision, or for the things that you really want to get a handle on. And then you can see how much, for instance, money you want to spend in getting a really good grip of your measurement error and the precision with that.
And you're going to hear that same theme coming from Neil Hoyne in his interview of starting with the decision you want to make and work backward as to what information it is that you need to have. But added to those sort of customer journey, the marketing funnel, what it is that we need now is thinking about the number of customers that you've got and how you're able to retain those customers. And that leads us into thinking about the customer lifetime value. And we could spend a lot of time about that. And Koen's going to continue to take you through that as I now have to run to my next meeting. So take us through the rest of this. And thank you very much for allowing me to join you for the first half hour of this particular program. So thank you very much. And I see that they're calling me in, so I've got to go now, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dave.
David, thank you so much. So this was, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so and I hope I will just keep my mic on now. So I'm actually not in Germany, but in Denmark, in Odense, and my hotel is linked to the Anderson Museum, which is where the happy children's voices on the background are coming from. So yes, so as Dave said, the kind of the classic funnel, I typically think through if you, for instance, want to make a sale in your category, what needs to happen for that to materialize. And so awareness, consideration, intent, and loyalty happen to be very important, specifically if you have a more higher involvement product, such as business to business or durable. So one of the reasons, for instance, why Jeff Bezos changed his mind about 6 years ago and say, well, we go from no advertising to some advertising, is because they got into the business of devices, Alexa and Echo. And so for these devices, you do need to get awareness and consideration to make it work. And so, of course, for your category and your industry, you may have different names for this one and different stages. But I think these are important. The other thing to sometimes consider is that, I mean, in some of my research, I can be surprised. So for instance, we figured out that advertising awareness is a key driver of lots of metrics for consumer packaged goods. So for instance, Coca-Cola, you know, they don't really measure awareness anymore. They have close to 100% awareness. But if people say yes to the question, have you seen any advertising from Coke in the last, let's say, 3 to 6 months, that correlates highly with their sales. So people just kind of, and that's one of the reasons they advertise so much, right? Where they bring on the cute polar bears and so forth. It's not because they want awareness or consideration. I mean, you're either, you know, Pepsi, Coke, or something else, right? They're going to have a very hard time to persuade you to switch, but they want to keep that top of mind. And so analysis can show you some of these things. Was there a question, Christine, or?
Sorry,
yeah, no, but I see that one of the guests has the hands up. It's Mr. Pauwels.
Okay, yeah. Oh, happy to answer. Go ahead.
I give him the micro for a second. Or do you want to write a question in the chat? Okay. He's writing to me now. Sorry, mistake. Okay, so we can go on. It's all okay.
No worry. We will have time afterwards.
Yes, we will.
So I was specifically asked to talk about newer metrics, and so I just moved the slides. So in about, I think, 25 seconds, you'll see that too. And a lot of it, my last 20 years have been spent on digital assets. You know, the typical paid, owned, and earned media. If I you know, pay on display ads, what is going to be the return? You know, how many page views do I get? How many consumers do things online that indicates that they're going to buy more? The other really cool thing about digital metrics is that you very often have them of your competitors as well. So in highly competitive industries, you have a benchmark. So if you say, hey, you know, our post went viral and we got, you know, X people retweeting it or sharing it, then your manager, you know, typically not from Gen Z probably, will ask, well, what does that mean? Is that good or bad? And so online, you have a relatively easy time to say, hey, compared to our competitors or to a typical posts, we got that much more. So it helps put things in perspective. But, you know, for all the digital metrics, you have the same criteria as for the classic ones. You have to show that, you know, people sharing your content is ultimately related to your objective, let's say more sales, and that you are able to influence it with your marketing actions. The other ones are there because we have fantastic contributions, as I said, in a special issue of Experts. So Kuzum and Paul have this wonderful, wonderful piece on retail metrics, which is basically how distribution metrics, which are often overlooked, can have a huge impact on your bottom line. They also talk about retail media. So this is the current hype in the US. So starting from, let's say, Amazon advertising, and lots of other retailers have jumped on that bandwagon and say, well, why can't we get the consumer to your message right when she or he is about to buy it? So in online retail, that is, of course, very easy. And you can do things either very close to purchase. So a consumer kind of serves to your category or even your brand and your detail page and may be able to buy or not. You can also do that in related categories. So we have some fun experiences with, for instance, showing an ad about coffee in a cold beverage category, because we know that a lot of people switch from cold beverage to coffee at some point in their online journey. And so if you can put your coffee ad in there, you may be the first. So you can also use digital to literally build the brands, to create awareness, consideration for new products. And so retail media gives you this new tool that you can balance against maybe more traditional ways of launching a product. Reputation risk. So Susan Fournier and Shubhas Srinivasan, my 10 times co-author, have this piece on risk to your brand reputation. So if you go with a very famous influencer, or if you take a stance on a social issue, what are really the risks to your reputation? We saw that 2 weeks ago with Bud Light in the United States. I'm always fascinated when I come to Germany. I always buy Rittersport chocolate, right? Quadrat is practice good. And so a few years ago, we have this event, if I remember correctly, I was in Germany at the time, that some governing official in Germany said, well, it's not all natural, or we cannot verify it. And you had all of these customers kind of rallying behind Rittersport and helping the brand. Unfortunately, Dave is gone, but he just in Croatia in the Challenges of Europe conference gave a wonderful keynote speak on marketing nations. So he goes to Davos every year, and he has this very cool survey measurement across the whole world that rates nation states on a whole bunch of criteria. And so every time that you have movement, and there is a lot of movement, the number one constantly topples from there. I think the very first time we measured that, Germany came out on top. And so you can look at that classification. So you also have a lot of kind of risk management things there, right? Because you can spend so much money on marketing your country, but then a politician does something and it's all out of the window. We have not one but two special issues about purpose beyond profits. One of them is a more general one about how you should think about the purpose of a company, of a for-profit company beyond profit. The other one is very much focused on ESG, environmental, social, and governance metrics, which is absolutely key also in the US. And I think a wonderful way to marry finance and marketing, because my financial colleagues really care about that. I have a very recent paper that shows that that consumers really care about the E and the S. So consumers care about the fact that you're sustainable and that you treat your employees well. Institutional investors don't care about it whatsoever. They care about governance. So there's some interesting trade-offs. It's not all the time that when you do well, you do good, and vice versa. And so I expect that there's a lot of research in this area coming out that may interest you, because there's such a backlash against ESG metrics right now in the States for several reasons. And then finally, of course, all the links to financials. Actually, here in Germany, there's several professors that specialize in this marketing finance interface and help you to show, for instance, that even if marketing communication may not increase the stock price, it reduces the risk of the company. And so I always say, well, finance people, they just want four things, right? They want more cash flows, they want faster cash flows, they want a big residual value of the company. And so we now have the tools to kind of show that the investments you make in marketing help. If you launch a new product, for instance, and you invest in advertising, you both get a higher curve and you get the cash faster. And very often you can increase the price of the product, which is absolutely key in inflation. We put this figure here partly because Dave and I like it so much. So in our classes, we actually ask executives to draw the marketing sales response curve, which typically gets us blank stares. But it's basically, hey, if you double your advertising investment, how much more sales or revenues do you really expect? It's something that you could ask people in your company, specifically the sales folks kind of, can give their perspective on that one. But it's also something that we love to estimate with historical data for your own company, right? So very often in the past, we have talked about diminishing returns, which is called the concave curve. So you get your biggest buck right when you invest a bit in something, let's say display ads or billboards, and then you have diminishing returns. Now, in contrast, what we typically find now is this S-shaped curve. So there's a tipping point under which you get very little returns, right? And we know that, for instance, from TV advertising. If you spend just a few cents on TV advertising, it's going to be shown at 6 a.m. when nobody's watching. You need to spend a substantial amount of money. So spending under that amount is just not smart in any way. But then it becomes diminishing returns. So this S-shaped curve has very interesting implications depending on your volume or profitability objectives about where you should spend. Profitability, ROI, efficiency is typically maximized at the tipping point, right? So where the inflection point of the curve, for those of you mathematically inclined, but kind of you get more profits if you spend a bit over it. So that's just a fascinating area that we can get to by analyzing data and getting more precise. It also means that if you believe in S-shaped curves, which most managers I talk to do, that you should not spread all your money around. You know, you should not put all your eggs in one basket, of course, but you should have a few kind of key activities where you should spend sufficient resources on to really break through and to make customers notice and to motivate your sales force and all of that good stuff. So whether your curve is concave or S-shaped has key implications for how you should spend your money there. Okay. If there's no questions with this one, I'll go to my last slide. So I promise to to go to full Q&A afterwards. And so Kristen asked us kind of how to remain relevant and face future challenges. And here we just reproduced the figures from the book. So dashboards have some core functions and future challenges. A core function of a dashboard is to organize decision relevant data. There's been some research that I quote in my papers that shows that just getting alignment on which metrics should we measure and how should we approach a decision, that's like 50% of the whole benefit from dashboards. So it's a way of thinking. Even before you populate with data, you get a lot of benefit of doing this exercise within your organization. But then, of course, you know, with some good data and frequent updates, you can really improve marketing decision making. Which is the ultimate objective, right? So when people hire me as a consultant to increase the ROI, they always ask me first, well, what's the ROI of hiring you? And I'm like, that's easy. If you're not going to change any decision, it's zero. I can guarantee you that right away. It's only when you're open to at least kind of get some different perspectives that you can get something very concretely about what else to do out of the exercise. Ensure marketing accountability. So the finance folks in your organization want marketing to be prudent stewards of the company's resources. They have a different mindset. I always say, you know, marketing is in a growth mindset. You see opportunities. Finance people are a bit more conservative. They're in a prevention focus, right? They want to make sure they don't have too much risks. So people kind of have to speak each other's language. But financial people are so much happier and they sleep better at night when they know that even though marketing folks come up with very creative and crazy ideas, that they are responsible and they're constantly looking for, well, if we move the needle, for instance, we have high effectiveness but low efficiency because we tried out something new. Next year, do we have the metrics in place to get the same results but with less resources? So it's very effective, typically because you've been so good and so creative, but can we do it more efficient next year? And so when they feel that marketing folks are in that mindset, they're just much happier to give money and budgets and not to cut the budget when things get rough. And then ensure, support top line growth and cost efficiency for a healthy bottom line, right? So if you look at Tim Ambler's book, he's like, well, the 3 financial metrics you should really use is top line, revenues, marketing, cost, and bottom line. And so if you keep track of those 3 in finance, and then you have like 7 good marketing metrics that appeal to you as a marketer, then you're great. And of course, over time, the goals of your company may change. So in boom times, typically, you know, as a marketer, you're supposed to increase top line growth. Grow 10% a year, 20, 30%. We'll give you the money. In recession times, it goes more towards, well, we have our bottom line, and can you cut a few things? And so I've been asked kind of for best practice examples, right? I always say a marketing dashboard allows you to answer the financial question. If your budget has to be cut with 20% next year, what should we cut? You should know which of your kind of activities are the least efficient, are, you know, past diminishing returns. I mean, of course, you can fight back to the question, right? But you should at least have your answer for yourself. The same thing, you know, if we want to have 20% more revenues than predicted next year, which marketing activities should we increase? And so dashboards that really get to that decision ability are really great. Other best practice examples I would say is that a lot of dashboards, they've used the car analogy. So, and a lot of dashboards have like green, orange, and red, like the traffic lights. And I'm like, that's very cool. And it's, for instance, compared to the target for this year, we're in green, we're in yellow, we're in red. But I always like to add the blue light for the things that worked exceptionally well. And so when I look across my organization and I see, oh, some manager in Argentina did something and he had 3 times the effect that was expected in his market. I want to learn from that. I want a dashboard that flashes up and says, hey, this is something that we should look at, and maybe we can learn something from the situation in Argentina that we can use in Germany. And so I think a dashboard that doesn't just look at kind of, how are things going to target, but also at which things are going exceptionally well. I draw a lot of fun inspiration from that one. And then finally, a dashboard is just wonderful at different levels. It's typically layered. So if I'm the assistant brand manager responsible for e-commerce, for Rittersport, for instance, I'm specifically interested in how my campaigns are doing. Like I have 2 campaigns on YouTube, I have 3 campaigns on Amazon. I want to know kind of almost at an hourly level how each of them is doing. So I need very specific metrics, but they should layer up to higher and higher other metrics. So my brand manager is maybe looking at spending on online versus offline. The CMO is looking at spending on Rittersport versus other things. And so a really good dashboards is able to point and click, and that you can zoom in and zoom out, but that everything is connected to the ultimate objectives. Finally, and I see that my time is is also running out. My last thing is future challenges. Dashboards are supposed to help you alleviate biases. There's a lot of press now about bias in AI algorithms, but of course we know that we humans are also biased. And I always say kind of big data doesn't reduce the bias automatically. It just makes it easier to cherry pick data and to have a whole bunch of stuff. So you really want to think through how does having the dashboard information helps to overcome some human decision biases that we all have, that we think about recent things first, that we are, anchored on certain things that we did in the past that we don't have to have. Keep them dynamic, allow people to suggest new metrics, prune the old metrics, right? So you thought this was a great idea, we got data, we've been running the dashboard for 2 years and we never ever looked at that metric, or we never changed the decision based on that metric. Maybe it's time to prune it and get something else in. And then, of course, make use of new technologies, right? So my kind of favorite thing, and I had that with NIM about the future of market research, this was before ChatGPT, was that I'm in this metaverse kind of environment, and I ask a question by voice, and then the avatar changes in the consumer that I'm targeting, and he or she asks, answers my questions, and I have this holodeck-like experience, right? So now with generative AI, we may think a bit differently, but how can that help you to, for instance, identify which things should you be looking at that you're not looking at? And so allow kind of these technologies to make things more efficient and your life better for you. And then I was going to stop here. I just put Neil Horner on here because we have the full interview in the special issue, which of course I highly recommend. Thanks so much, and back to you, Sandra.